The dining room table had 12 chairs. I counted them while I was standing in the doorway, holding Marisol's hand, watching her look down at her shoes. She was 7 years old, wearing the yellow dress we'd bought together at the thrift shop on Del Mar Boulevard. The one with the white button she'd fastened herself that morning, slowly, one by one, concentrating like it mattered. She had a small braid over her left ear that I'd practiced 3 times the night before using a YouTube tutorial, and a comb I'd borrowed from my neighbor Ruth Ann. My fiancé's mother looked at Marisol the way you look at something that has wandered onto a surface where it doesn't belong. Then she smiled, the particular smile that doesn't reach the muscles around the eyes, and said, "Oh, sweetheart, this dinner is for our kids. You understand, don't you?" Marisol understood. She always understood. That was the thing about her that nobody in that room deserved. Welcome to Family Revenge Stories New. I'm going to tell you about a table that became a boundary, a document that became a weapon, and a little girl whose quiet question rearranged everything. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and stay close. Justice in this story doesn't arrive loud. It arrives exact. My name is Teo Vargas. I was 34 years old at the time, a licensed structural engineer for a firm in St. Louis that specialized in bridge rehabilitation. I had spent 11 years learning how things hold weight, how invisible tension becomes visible failure, how a crack no wider than a fingernail can, if ignored long enough, bring down something everyone assumed was permanent. I had bought my own house at 29, a 1940s brick 2-flat on Leffingwell Avenue, the kind of building that needed everything and cost me 6 years of overtime to stop needing it. I refinished the floors myself. I repointed the mortar on the west wall in October, working weekends in the cold because the contractor quote was $11,000 I didn't have. Marisol came into my life through my cousin Delia, who was her mother. Delia died of a pulmonary embolism when Marisol was 4-6 weeks after a surgery that was supposed to be routine. I was the only family member who showed up to the hospital at 3 in the morning. I was the only one who stayed. I became Marisol's legal guardian 9 months later, after a process that cost me $14,000 in legal fees, and 6 months of supervised visits that I passed without a single citation. She called me Teo for the first year. Then one Tuesday morning she called me Papa and looked immediately terrified, like she'd said something breakable. I told her she could call me whatever felt right. She chose Papa. Her name for herself, the one she'd invented, was Soul. I met Renata Duchesne at a structural conference in Chicago. She was a civil attorney, precise and funny, with the kind of mind that organized everything before speaking. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. In those 2 years I watched her be good with Soul. Patient. Careful. She brought her chapter books. She remembered Soul's preference for strawberry over grape. When Renata proposed telling her family that she and I were serious, I felt the first small vibration, the kind you feel in a structure before you hear it. Her mother, Corinne Duchesne, lived in a house in Crèvecoeur that had 6,000 square feet and a professionally landscaped backyard and a photograph in the entryway of every Duchesne grandchild arranged by age. There were 9 grandchildren in the photograph. Soul was not in it. Renata told me the photo was taken before we were serious. I noted the photograph was less than 6 months old. Renata's brother, Philip, had 3 children of his own. Her sister, Margot, had 2. These were the kids Corinne referred to as our kids, a phrase with a radius that excluded precisely one 7-year-old in a yellow thrift store dress. The invitation to the Easter dinner came through Renata, with 2 conditions she relayed to me carefully and with visible discomfort. It was a sit-down formal dinner, and it was, quote, primarily for the family children so they can bond. She said her mother had mentioned the seating would be tight. She said she was sure it would be fine. What does primarily mean? Soul asked when I told her we'd been invited. It means mostly, I said. But you're invited. Mostly means you're included. She nodded and I watched something move across her face. A small practiced adjustment, the kind children develop when adults' words and adults' meanings don't match. She was 7. She had already learned to translate. I should have heard the crack then. I heard it. I went anyway because Renata loved her family and I loved Renata, and I believed with an engineer's faith in the repairability of structures that people who were shown better usually did better. I was wrong about that last part. We arrived at 6. The table was set beautifully, white linen, water glasses with the family monogram in silver, a centerpiece of white tulips that must have cost $200. I noticed immediately that the settings were counted. Corinne was a woman who counted settings. There were 11 plates. There were, including Sol, 12 people expected. Corinne greeted Renata with both hands and a kiss on each cheek. She greeted me with a handshake and a smile that didn't reach the muscles around her eyes. She looked at Sol and said, "Oh, sweetheart, this dinner is for our kids. You understand, don't you?" Sol's hand tightened in mine. That was all. Her face didn't move. Philip's wife, Bettine, looked at her own plate. Margot reached for her wine glass. Renata said, "Maman," and Corinne was already gesturing toward the kitchen, already explaining that there was a lovely little plate being made up for Sol in there, that it was cozy, that the children's table was really more fun anyway. And wasn't this just how it was done at formal dinners? I looked at Renata. She looked at me. One of those long suspended seconds. I said quietly, "Sol eats with me." Corinne's smile flickered. "Teo, I simply don't have the place setting." "Then I'll set one," I said. "The linen is custom. The arrangement. Then Sol and I will eat in the kitchen." I said it the same way. No louder. Together. "That seems fine," I said. "It seems fine." We ate in the kitchen. A housekeeper named Celestine quietly set up 2 places for us at the small island counter and said nothing, but she gave Sol an extra bread roll and winked. Nobody from the dining room came to check on us. Philip's youngest, a boy named Crispin who was 9, wandered in once and stared at Sol like she was doing something interesting. He almost sat down. He looked toward the dining room. He left. After dinner, Corinne found me by the coat rack. She said, in a voice calibrated precisely for the distance between us and everyone else, that she hoped I understood that she had standards for her table, and that certain situations, she paused on the word situations, required discretion. I got Sol's coat. I helped her button it. She had mastered the buttons by then. We said goodnight to Renata, who stood in the doorway looking like someone standing at the edge of 2 countries, not certain which one was home. We drove home. Sol was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She counted the plates, didn't she?" "Yeah," I said. "She did." Sol looked out the window. "Counting is how you tell people where they are." I drove the rest of the way without saying anything because there was nothing to add to that. Renata and I were engaged for 4 more months after that night. She was trying. I believe she was trying. But trying, I was learning, is not the same as arriving. I found an apartment for Sol and me. A 2-bedroom on Shoto, 3rd floor, $1,340 a month, which was $280 more than I'd budgeted. I picked up a Saturday consulting gig reviewing residential load calculations for a small firm in Clayton. $40 an hour, 6 hours a week. It covered the gap. Sol changed schools. The new school was 2 miles farther, which meant earlier mornings. We were out of the house by 7:15. I made her oatmeal with brown sugar and a handful of blueberries every morning because she'd once said it tasted like something good was about to happen. I made it every morning for 8 months. In the apartment, I hung a framed photograph on the wall near the kitchen table. A photo of Sol and Delia from when Sol was 2, sitting on a porch somewhere I didn't recognize, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. I had found the photo in a box of Delia's things I'd been given after she died. I'd had it for 3 years without hanging it. In the new apartment, I hung it the first day. Sol saw it and stood very still for a moment. Then she sat down at the kitchen table without saying anything, and I made her a cup of chamomile tea with honey the way she liked it, and we sat together until she was ready to talk, and then she wasn't, and that was also fine. Corinne called twice. Once to ask if Renata and I had considered counseling. Once to invite us, both of you, she said with careful emphasis, meaning without Sol, to a family lunch. I declined both times. I did not explain why. The explanation was not for her. Somewhere in those months, I found something in the box of Delia's papers I hadn't fully sorted. A manila envelope with my name on it in Delia's handwriting, sealed, with a small yellow sticky note that said "for when it's time." I put it in the drawer of my bedside table. Something in the shape of it, its weight, the precision of Delia's lettering, Made me feel that opening it required a moment I hadn't reached yet. Sol asked me once what was in it. I told her I didn't know yet. She accepted this with the gravity she gave everything. Some things wait, she said. Mama used to say that. I felt something shift in my chest like a beam resettling after a long pressure. If you're watching this and you don't know how the envelope fits yet, subscribe now and don't leave. The rest of this story finds you. Delia died with less than $1,000 in her bank account. That was what everyone assumed. That was what I assumed. The envelope stayed in my drawer for 6 months. I opened it on a Sunday morning in October, while Sol was at a neighbor's birthday party, and the apartment was quiet enough to hear the radiator knock. Inside was a letter from Delia, handwritten on 3 pages. And behind it, a document from a law firm in Kansas City, the office of an attorney named Marcus Elstree, outlining the terms of a trust established in 1987 by Delia's grandfather, Augusto Vidal, a man who had emigrated from Guadalajara in 1961 and spent 40 years quietly accumulating real estate in 3 Missouri counties. The trust had one surviving beneficiary, Marisol Renata Vidal Garza. Current value, $412,000, plus 3 rental properties generating a combined monthly income of $6,200, managed in trust until Marisol's 25th birthday or legal adoption by a guardian of record, at which point 51% of management authority transferred immediately. I sat on my kitchen floor for a while. I called Marcus Elstree on Monday morning. He had been trying to reach Delia for 18 months before her death, and then me for 2 years. The address he had was outdated, the phone number disconnected. He had found me through my engineering license registration 3 months earlier and sent a letter to my old address that had been forwarded slowly to a cousin who had it in a pile he'd meant to deal with. We met in his Kansas City office the following week. I brought Sol, who sat in a leather chair that was too large for her and held a cup of apple juice that Marcus's assistant produced as if she'd anticipated it, and I sat across from a man who laid documents across a mahogany table with the careful precision of someone who had been waiting a long time to do exactly this. I brought the manila envelope. I placed it on the table. I told him Delia had written a letter. He read it. His hands went very still. Then I asked him to help me arrange a meeting. We met at Corinne's house because Renata had asked me to, and I owed Renata that much. She had spent 8 months trying to reckon with a mother who had never in her life been made to account for anything. I agreed to one meeting. I arrived with Marcus Elstree in a folder. Renata was there. Philip, Margot, Corinne, in the sitting room that had 6,000 square feet of reasons to believe the world organized itself for her benefit. On the coffee table I set down the manila envelope. Corinne looked at it the way she'd looked at Sol in the doorway, like something that had wandered onto a surface where it didn't belong. Marcus spoke first. He outlined the trust, the properties, the value. He used precise numbers. He said the phrase sole beneficiary 3 times, because it warranted repetition. Philip said, "That's impossible." His voice was flat. Then louder. "That's our grandfather he never said." Margot's face did something I hadn't expected. It went quiet. She looked at her hands. She looked like someone who had just recognized, privately, a calculation she'd made long ago using wrong numbers, and understood now what she had cost herself by making it. Corinne said, She's not really family." She said it the way she'd said situations. Calibrated. Precise. Like language was a door you could close. I let the room sit with that for a moment. Then I said, "Augusto Vidal didn't think so." I opened the manila envelope. Inside was the other thing, the thing I hadn't mentioned to anyone yet. A photograph, the same photograph that hung on my kitchen wall. Sol and Delia on a porch, both of them laughing. On the back, in an old man's careful hand, "My girls." October 2017. He had met her. He had known her. He had made his decision. Corinne began to speak. I put my hand up, not in anger, just in the manner of a man who has measured how much weight a structure can hold, and knows that this one has held enough. "She counted the plates," I said. "Sol told me that counting is how you tell people where they are." I looked at Corinne. "You told her where she was. Now I'm telling you where she is." Sol was not in that room. She was in school, 3rd grade, learning long division, eating lunch from a Star Wars thermos she'd chosen herself at the Target on Kings Highway. She never knew this meeting happened the way it happened. She knew later that there was money, held in trust, managed carefully, a future made solid by a great-grandfather she would never remember meeting and who had seen in her, at 2 years old, something worth protecting across time. Augusto Vidal's properties were managed by a professional firm under Marcus Elstree's oversight, with me holding guardian's authority. The Duchesne family had no claim. There was no legal mechanism by which they could construct one. I had asked Marcus about every possible angle, the way you check every joint in a structure, because I needed to be certain before I proceeded that there was nothing to dislodge. Renata came to me the week after the meeting. She stood in my doorway, the door of the apartment on Shoto, and she said that she was sorry. She said it simply, without performance. I believed her. I told her I knew she was. We stood in the doorway for a moment that felt like the last load-bearing moment of something that had carried real weight. She asked if there was anything she could do. I told her she could be kind to the next person her mother tried to exclude from a table. She nodded. She left. I watched her go, and I did not feel what I might have felt, because grief that has been expected is still grief, but it lands differently, softer, like something that already knew it was falling. I offered Corinne nothing because she asked for nothing. She was too proud to ask. I considered once sending a note, just acknowledging that she had loved her grandchildren, that I understood the shape of that love even if not its borders. I sat down to write it twice. Both times I stopped, not from cruelty but because some gestures require a recipient capable of receiving them, and she was not yet that person. Maybe she would be. I left the door unlocked. Sol graduated from elementary school in June. She wore a white dress she had picked out herself and carried a small bouquet of flowers I'd bought from the gas station on Grand Avenue because the florist was closed and Sol said gas station flowers had good intentions. She gave a small speech about what she'd learned in 5th grade, and at the end she said, "The most important thing I know is that some people count you and some people don't. Find the ones who count you right." The teachers thought it was a metaphor about math. I knew where she'd learned it. On the kitchen table that morning before the ceremony, I had made oatmeal with brown sugar and blueberries. Sol sat across from me in the yellow dress, a different yellow dress, a new one she'd bought herself from her birthday money, and we ate together under the photograph of her and Delia on the porch, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. She looked up at me before we left and said, "Mama would have counted the plates." "Yeah," I said. "She would have added one." Some people spend their lives building tables that exclude. Some people spend theirs making sure there's always room. You probably know someone right now who's been told in one language or another that the dinner isn't for them, that the seat doesn't exist, that the count came up short. Check on that person today. Not tomorrow. Today. Add one to your count. If this story found you, share it. Leave a comment below about someone who added a seat for you, or for someone you love. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. I'll see you in the next one.